All right, we are live. Welcome to Axe to Grind, the first ever and maybe last ever live streamed show. I've got as my very first guest, my inaugural guest, Rick Stump. Rick, thank you for coming on today.
Thanks. Thank you for having me on. Means a lot.
Awesome. So what was it? August 20th, you celebrated the 45th anniversary of your campaign.
Absolutely. It was a lovely event. We did 3 days of gaming straight. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So who is in your campaign? Like we need the full story here. Well, summarize it somewhat briefly because we don't have 45 years, but
Okay, so I'll summarize the beginning. When I started, I had 2 of my sisters, my older sister and my younger sister, and 3 friends of mine, and we all ranged in age from 10 to 15.
Wow. Okay.
Before that, I actually had been taught D&D by some college kids from Ball State, 2 of whom had actually played at the University of Wisconsin and had met Gary before, and they were playing OD&D. And between when I was 9 and 10, they taught me how to play.
Okay.
And then I was getting the AD&D books as they came out. I got the Dungeon Master's Guide the day it came out. Joe at Reader's World, the Muncie Mall, set it aside for me. I read through it 3 times and then set up my campaign and started. And between then and now, the last count we have, I've had about of players that have played at least 3 separate sessions, about 90 people.
Wow.
And probably 4 times that many PCs come through that have played at least a couple sessions. We just had I want to say 6 PCs domain in the last real world 18 months, which brings our total of people at the domain level, characters at domain level, to over 30 in 45. Yeah. And I don't start anybody above first level. We don't, everyone else is 5th level. Let's start you 5th level. We start again. I described this in my blog 12 years ago. I do jazz band adventuring, where when you join my campaign, you must make 2 characters. Mm-hmm. And then we go back and forth because I keep strict time rules. And this last sessions was transformative. And we had a number of characters go up there, and we now technically have the highest level character that's ever existed in the campaign is active in the domain right now. A 13th magic user thief.
Okay. So now the rule set you're using is Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition, right?
First Edition. I've got some house rules, but nothing major in my opinion. And so very much AD&D 1E.
All right, so we gotta break this down, because nowadays, people talk about the 5-session campaign, the 12-session campaign.
Yeah, the six session. I think it's 6 sessions is the average 5e campaign, right?
Right. And then my Iron Empire campaign, I felt pretty good about it. It was 118 sessions, right? So
that's good. That's good stuff.
Little over 2 years. You've been doing yours 45 years. So first question. The players that began it with you, how many of them are still involved?
Oh, gosh. None of them, and 3 of them are dead.
Wow. That's, so you're using 1-to-1 damage.
Pretty much, yes. It feels true. Of the original people that played with me, especially, we had one died in a car crash, very young, at high school age.
Oh, brutal.
Another one passed from cancer in his 20s, very painful. And then the very first person to roll a character for me as a game master, David, also passed from cancer just a few years ago. A very big loss.
I'm sorry.
I've had about 4 other players pass already too.
Wow.
Well, a fair number were soldiers,
right?
And that does make a difference.
Yeah, because you're a veteran. You did 8 years in the Army.
Yeah, 8 years in the Army, active duty, out of Bragg. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so you were down in North Carolina. You weren't far from me at all.
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, that was actually another big thing that really impacted the campaign. I came out of my training, got to brag. The very first weekend, I went to a bookstore, and there's a tiny little 3x5 in the bookstore. Looking for D&D players, married couples preferred, call this number.
Uh-huh.
I called the number. I got invited out, and that's how I met Lou Pulsifer.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I was, as I recall, 19 years old all month. Came in. He had his Tanilda campaign that he started in OD&D in 1977.
Mm-hmm.
I played with him for about a year. He liked my campaign, which I call Seaward. So between 1987 and 1992, we co-DM'd each other's worlds.
That's awesome.
And it's when I came up with the concept I call the Vasty Deep. And so the rough mechanics are, if you're in my campaign world and you're at least one day at sea away from any land, you can, if you know what you're doing, and there's a way I check, you can actually sail to one of the connected quote unquote game worlds, like Tanilda. So characters can go back and forth and share adventures in both worlds without having to use plane shift or anything like that.
Right. Right.
And that actually worked to our advantage. We have a lot of feedback, and of course, Lou is. I mean, he literally wrote the book on game design. He was the first guy to teach role-playing game design at college level, wrote the textbook. And he really he forced me to think about my campaign in what I would call an adult manner, and it really helped it mature and survive. Yeah.
Epic. So I don't know him personally. I've interacted with him several times online and briefly at conventions. Very, very classy gentleman. Very
tall.
guy.
Very, very tall man.
Yeah.
His wife, by the way, is an angel.
Really?
And she is the best player of clerics I've ever met.
Okay.
Yeah. They met at a D&D game in England when he was helping set up TSR UK. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
So this was back when you actually had to like use written notices on a bulletin board in a game store to find. It was like a real challenge to find gamers.
It was really tough. Yeah, it was really tough. I actually about half of the players that I got at that time were because of the very, very incredible hobby shop in Fayetteville called The Hobbit.
Okay.
Yeah, met a lot of people there, including the guy that introduced me to my wife.
Nice.
And it was back then. It was you had to go out and actively recruit people and know them. There was a lot. There was a shocking amount of gameplay in the military too. When I was at the Defense Language Institute, Monterey, Friday and Saturday night, you thought you were at a convention. There'd be the board game BattleTech. There'd be Starfleet Battles. There'd be Traveler. There'd be D&D. All that stuff. Just every table.
Yep. It was exactly the same way at West Point. We had a war games club. Like the moment classes ended Friday afternoon, boom, we went over to the war games club. We played till taps Saturday, Sunday, all day. Just
the West Pointers. When I was at Bragg, the West Pointers would come in and like, I can play chainmail.
Yeah. I mean, it was fantastic. We had such a good time. So my current virtual tabletop group, the Grey Brotherhood, is my friends from West Point playing together again with a new group. So we had all we basically put the band together, put the band back together and got everybody back doing it. And some of them hadn't played in 2 decades. So like our first sessions were pretty rough as they had to.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because one of my very first players and Lou are still active in my campaign. Lou's primary character campaign still exists.
Awesome.
Mainly as an NPC. But I try to get a hold of him when I can and say, hey, this is what he's facing. What's he going to do?
Right.
And same with George, who's technically, and my players, when they listen to this, will hear it, is technically still running the kingdom of elves to the north of the main thing. A lot of why is they doing that? Well, George, I got a hold of George and he said, do X. Yeah.
So let's talk about timekeeping, right? Everybody likes to have internet wars over timekeeping.
Oh, I hate that war.
You said you keep strict time.
I do.
What do? Do you do 1-to-1? Do you do per session? Like, how do you handle time?
I do what I call one game clock to rule them all, or one game
Okay.
clock. I developed a calendar for the campaign pretty early. It's 13 months of 28 days,
Mm-hmm.
etc. So I've got an in-game calendar, and I keep track of all the PCs on the game calendar. For example, right now, I have a Discord team of about 5 players that play through Discord, and I have a live sit-down session of about 4 or 5 players, depending, that sit down with me. And we've got between them, I want to say 21 active PCs.
Okay. Yep.
Right. So I have a spreadsheet sort of thing that I use that I've created for a long time ago when I went digital, and I track where they all are. So, for example, recently we had a bunch of people do domain stuff. So I've got most of the guys all caught up. So they're close at the same time, but the Discord guys are about 90 days behind in the game universe. So I've got to catch them up in game time about 92, 93 days. And of course, in the meantime, excuse me, I've got one of the domain guys is actually traveling to the Seven Heavens. So I got to keep track of the time in the Seven Heavens. And I've got another one who is traveling to Yashima, which is the Japan land of my campaign. So I'm like, oh my gosh, he's going to be gone for campaign months just getting there. So I'm trying to track that down. But excuse me again, it's ragweed season here. I do use the way I do it. Like here's an example: the guys in the domain are technically all caught up, so we're not doing anything in session now. They're not in the middle of a dungeon. They're not in the middle of a fight. So every real world day is a real world day for them.
Okay.
The guys that are not caught up in time are also not in the middle of the session. So a real world day is real world game day for them too, but they're back in time as they go through. So I'm asking them, what are you doing in the meantime? What's going on? But if you're like in the middle of a dungeon and you got to knock it off because it's 3 a.m. at work, they're frozen in time until we come back to them.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So you use a modified 1-to-1 time.
Oh, I point out that what I'm doing is what's described in the DMG as just strict timekeeping.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
When no active play is ongoing, you're not in the middle of a dungeon, not in the middle of a fight, so you're not active. Then 1 real day equals 1 game day. Yeah.
Right. And how much real time has passed? Sorry, how much in-game time has passed over the course of your 45-year campaign?
I checked the other day, 108 years.
Okay, because obviously when you play some sessions, time passes on a more accelerated basis.
Sometimes a lot of time goes by in the sessions.
Right. Yeah. Right. And so that creates the catch-up. So the guys that played brought it 90 days ahead. So then the other guys in short races.
Well, there was one not too long ago. It was almost 4 real world years ago. Virtually every PC in the campaign went to Yashima by boat. That's 6 game months one way. Right. Did a bunch of adventures in Asia land and then came back. Well, that just added 12 months to the campaign clock.
Right.
And I'm like, well, let's do all the encounters you're doing at sea. We role played all that. So so they're a year ahead in the calendar, in the game calendar, in about 9 weeks of real world time. So
right.
You have leaps like that again and again. Matter of fact, one of the most interesting ones was in 1984 when I had a bunch of domain level guys that were doing it at the same time, and they just agreed amongst themselves, we're doing X, Y, and Z with our domains, and it's going to take 2 game years for this to get done. Let's just go forward in time until we're done. And we did that. I'm like, let's check on encounters, let's check diplomacy. We can talk about this off the table. And by the way, that's one of the great things about having domain level guys. 85% of what you do with them is not at the table.
Right.
Right. And when they were done, I think it took us 4 weeks, maybe, of real world time. The entire campaign had gone 2 years in the future. So,
yep.
And that happens. Matter of fact, I think it's very healthy. Some of my players now are talking about, well, when we're all settled, maybe we'll do a time skip like that. We'll just jump 3 years and see what happens. And, maybe we will.
Now, do you ever have multiple parties within the same campaign? And what do you do if they want to go on very different time rates? Like,
I
have you?
always have multiple parties. I've always had multiple parties in the same campaign, and
Okay.
they tend to always end up doing different time rates. Again, we'll talk about Clarence, which is one of the sort of semi-independent characters in campaign right now. He bounces back and forth between different groups.
Mm-hmm.
I do something called jazz banding. So there's no such thing as in my campaign as a party. It's always a party.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Clarence went off and he went to study ninjutsu in Yashima, and he was gone for a long period of time. So I'm tracking him by himself where he's going. In the meantime, what we call Team Thief, which is a lot of the scouts and barbarians and thieves of the party, got together and said, well, we're going to map this wild area that's never been mapped before. So that took them 18 game months to get that done as they wandered around. Mm-hmm. And then another group of player characters got together and did other things at the meantime. So that's one individual off doing X, one group of 7 PCs doing Y, another group of 5 PCs doing X. Z, and they're all doing them at different rates and different times. And I'll be honest with you, it's complicated, but man, is it worth it. When you're done, it's very, very worth it.
So have you ever had to have a retroactive continuity adjustment or created a time paradox?
That only happened once before I caught on how to avoid that by making sure that this is a long time ago. I want to say 1983, 84. I wasn't paying attention.
Right.
And one group of guys, and when I was young, I was what, 14, 15. And one party had gone into a cavern system and set up a trap to make sure that when the pirates came back, they got hit by the trap.
Okay.
And then I realized, oh my gosh, they're 3 weeks behind a party that just went in there, which would be a week after when they did it. I'm like, oh my gosh, how did they miss that trap? So I had to figure out, oh, well, some wandering monster came in and tripped the trap and was dead, and everybody missed it. And since then, I've been very careful to avoid those things. It's relatively simple to do if you're paying attention.
How do you do it?
Well, with a larger game world, people are usually not going to the same places at the same time for various good reasons. Here's an example. Again, just now we had a group of 4 PCs going west to attack a group of orcish city-states to establish the domains. There's no reason for anyone else to be there unless they're trying to start a war with 3 major orc kingdoms, and nobody else had the power to do that. I mean, these are the only guys that can do it, so they're not going to run into anybody timeline-wise.
Right.
The Discord guys are up in the 4 counties, which is now the 5 counties. I got to remember that 5 counties because somebody domained, and they're physically far away from the other parties, and so forth. It was a lot tougher when I started because when I started, I had a town where the good wizard lives so you could learn spells and where the pirates were, and that was it. It's about. But now that the campaign is much larger physically, it's also much sort of larger temporally. So it's very difficult for actually parties to run into each other now.
So what would you do if it happened now? Like,
if for some reason, and as a matter of fact, I have to be ready for this because there is at least one potion of time travel extant with a PC. Mm-hmm. And if anybody in the audience knows where they got that potion of time travel during a special one-off adventure, please say so in the comments. So that at any time they can actually travel through time and create paradoxes. I think that it would be relatively simple to deal with simply by saying it's magic. I don't have to explain anything. Or within the universe, there's a lot of fae, there's a lot of extraplanar creatures. I could get away with just having them interfere with everything.
Okay. So you would essentially Deus Ex Machina if someone
goes out Deus Ex Machina. Absolutely. Okay. I'd make sure that it made sense in the universe. Yeah.
Right. And so we might imagine then that a lot of the weird antics of mythology is actually the gods dealing with their player characters trying to fuck with each other's timeline.
Oh, I think that's absolutely 100%.
Right.
Really?
Right.
I mean, think about other systems you got like this. If you're playing a system like Champions, there's literally, I can see the future. How to explain I saw him dead and he's not dead. Right? Yeah. I mean, heck, I once played 10 sessions of Time Lords, which is all about moving back and forth in time.
Yep.
So it's, you can do it.
Yep. Slicarius has pointed out. Yeah. So basically, you can have Mandela effects in your campaign.
Well, not only can you do that, but I want you to think about this. This is actually something that happened not too long ago. One of the player characters, excuse me. Now you have to understand, I've got 3 major campaigns going.
Okay.
Seaward, which is 45 years old. Blackstone, which is a second AD&D second edition skills and powers, which is my wife's favorite system campaign. That's only 18 years old.
Okay.
And then a Champions campaign, which is only 15 years old.
Okay.
My baby campaign, so not that old. Stuff like this has happened in those games where people have traveled through time, and you got to deal with it,
Right.
But the big example is from the Blackstone campaign. Somebody found a powerful magic item that everyone wanted, and he said, "I'm going to use a wish and wish that everyone forgot that it existed."
Right.
That happens. Okay.
Yep.
How's that work? Oh my gosh. Well, I'm in an anti-magic shell, so I suddenly remember that jerk has got that magic item I want. So since that stuff can really happen inside the verisimilitude of the campaign.
Yep.
Telling somebody, oh, well, yeah, there was a time paradox, but the Planetar made you forget. Okay, fine.
Yeah. So I had a similar event occur in my Arn Empire campaign where the group found a ring of wishes, didn't know what it was, and they just dropped it off with the local sage to have it identified, thinking it was like a ring of protection.
Classic.
And so I had the sage wish that the players, forgot all about the ring. And so I'm such a bad person. I literally gaslighted my players. Like, so the next session, they were like, "Hey, let's go back and see the sage." And I'm like, "What sage are you guys talking about?" And they're like, "Yeah, Antonius the sage and Sipharon. We dropped off the ring." I'm like, "What ring?" I'm like flipping in my notebook. I'm like, are you guys messing with me?
I heartily approve. I am so proud. I can share something I did similarly. One of the PCs in the campaign with a really low intelligence, really low wisdom, got a magic item very early on, and they thought it was a bracelet of protection +1, but it was an Agathian in item form.
Okay.
So there's this powerful, lawful, good extraplanar creature riding along. And I was simply like, oh, we're getting this adventure together, do X, Y, and Z. Who should be running? And again, Jazz Band Adventuring. I was just like, you know what? It'd probably be a good idea if you brought Telnar along on that one. Oh, yeah, Telnar would be a good idea. And they're like, why is it that every time we're fighting this cult of evil necromancers, Telnar's there? And it took them like 3 years to realize. I kept just saying, really, Telnar should go on this one. So, yes, awesome. You're gaslighting them, me doing that stuff. The DM can really sort of subtly really nudge players into doing all sorts of crazy stuff.
That's right. All right, so we got a question from the audience. Michael Guy says, I want to hear about how Rick runs religion in his world. I'm pretty sure in his campaign, clerics turning undead are Catholic priests with crucifixes, for instance. So, Rick, tell us about religion.
That's it. I've got a series of posts on my blog. I'm going to pimp it. It's don'tsplittheparty.blogspot.com. Posting has been sparse recently because of my poor health. I do apologize. But I've got a series on religion. And what's interesting is when I was a young man, between about 17 and 22, I came to the conclusion I did not like pantheons.
Okay.
I tried a couple ideas for my own pantheon. I just, so I came back to, and I realized player's handbook, look at the page with located items, locate object spell. That's a cleric, there's a Catholic priest there. I came to the conclusion I was going to have this sort of vaguely Catholic concept going on. And that led to a cascade of stuff so that inside Seaward, all good clerics, and I have religious brothers, the NPCs that explain why clerics aren't parish priests. It's an NPC-only concept. Worship vaguely God, and it's a relatively vaguely Catholic concept. It was going to look Orthodox, etc. And then everybody else gets their power from extraplanar creatures like demons, devils, genies, etc. So there's no evil clerics. There's cultists. and I use a system where they basically, if you're, I'm a cultist of Orcus, you easily really raise dead, etc. And that is one of the ways I've really sort of deviated from base first edition the most, where like Orcish shamans are just a sort of cultist.
Right.
And frankly, it made things a lot easier because it's just a sort of vague hand wave of, this is vaguely European, just like everything else is vaguely European. And then bad guys know that they're not clerics; they're something else. And why do they have this weird power where they can touch you? It's like being touched by green slime. Oh, it's a cult,
Yep.
And it made things a lot easier.
Yeah.
And and that's the way I handle it. I've actually, like I said, I've got a couple of blog posts. If you're interested, you can check it out where I explain exactly how it works. And what's really funny is Lou Pulsifer, like I said, ran a big open table. He had, I think at one point we had 45 people playing, just rotating in and out. And of us, I converted, became Catholic, and became a theologian. Another player there converted, became Catholic, became a theologian. And another guy, a good friend of mine who was a neighbor, converted, and now he just retired as an Air Force chaplain. So,
Wow.
Yeah. Lots of religion there, which upsets Lou because he's an atheist, but he thinks it's just funny.
Right. God. So you were alive. You were gaming during this time, during the Satanic Panic in the 1980s. I was as well.
Yeah.
So we had a very uneasy relationship with Christianity as teenagers, because the more religious our friends' parents were, like, the less likelihood they were of letting them come play Dungeons and Dragons with us.
That's so sad.
Yeah, I remember age roughly 14 or so. My friend Fred finally got permission to let us play Dungeons and Dragons as long as we did it at his house. So me, being me in my early years, I show up, I meet the parents. I'm like, all right, where can we set up the crucifix? And do you guys have a cat?
That's awesome. That is so good.
Man.
It's interesting. I talk to people a lot, and it's I know that it sort of weirds people out, but I was never bullied about playing D&D. One of my players was a captain of the football team. Another one when I was in high school, and the other one was his cheerleader girlfriend. I remember a lot of after there was a local broadcast by a televangelist talking about the dangers of D&D, and actually half the high school teachers were mocking it. But I did have one teacher say, "Well, I really don't like that. Please don't bring your books into my class. And if you do, leave them in your bag so I don't see them." So I heard a lot about it, and I saw a lot of people discuss it, but it didn't really have a direct impact on me.
Right.
So
I
know it's true.
You're 6 years older than me. I'm thinking if you were 10 in 1979. So I was 4 in 1979. So you would have been. So you were 6 years older than me. So you were a half generation difference in terms of the gaming timeline. Mine was kind of split right between AD&D First Edition, AD&D Second Edition.
Yeah.
And
it was a lot worse for you guys because you're younger. I don't know what that's about, but yeah.
Yep. Yeah. All right, hang on. We got another question from the audience. Holden Cross wants to know: AD&D uses armor class as an actual armor type with a chart that adjusts to hit by the interaction between weapons. Is that in your campaign?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, Holden, I just wrote that out for you. Not only do I do it, but one of my players, Sam, gets really cross if I forget. I'm like, no, there's a +2, there's a -1, and he'll help the other players make sure they get the proper adjustment.
Okay, so you do use it. So do you play? Would you say you play AD&D basically rules as written, other than the changes you've made to clerics?
I would say that your comment from a while back about the Toronto SR about RAR rules as rewritten is how I play it.
Mm-hmm.
I have always done my best to play rules as written until something breaks or I adjust it for speedier play. Here's another example. I do initiative slightly different, and I did initiative straight out of the book for many years, And then I saw how other people did it. I tried a couple things, but now I do segment combat by segments, round by round. And oh yeah, Harbinger Games. I don't split the party. Thank you so much, Magnificent Devil. You're right. See, I don't log into my own page. I appreciate that very much. I tried different things until I finally came up with this one. The way that I do initiative is, if you're not surprised, everyone rolls a d6. I do individual initiative because I think it makes a lot more sense tactically.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's this first segment on which you can meaningfully act, but you can move every segment.
Okay.
Right. And that's a big difference because I found through bitter experience that I go, you go initiative just annihilates the concept of tactics and positioning.
I agree with you fully. This is a debate we've had several times on the ACKS Discord, and I've ultimately come down like you can mess with virtually anything in ACKS and have a good time, but if you try and run it with straight group initiative with the big battles, you're gonna blow up the game because
It just doesn't work. It doesn't work.
No.
You have situations of, okay, I'm a skilled fighter, but I'm going to stand here while the entire party is enveloped and the wizard gets killed. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. Also, you get, in ACKS with the cleaves, if everyone in the group gets to go first, you can have 50 attacks before the other guy is even acted. You're like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, you can't do it. And that's one of the biggest changes I've done. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, you heard it here, gentlemen, from one of the world's most experienced game masters.
Well, I will say this. I know for a fact that when you combine Seaward and Blackstone, I've DM'd at least 2,000 sessions.
Yeah, that's impressive. So, yeah. So what would you attribute the longevity of your campaigns to? Because, we had someone earlier mentioned, he said, only 15 years old, I'm having trouble keeping a D&D 5e game alive past a few sessions. So Mikey the Goat Cat said that. So what do you tell Mikey? So what if, let's say he wants to keep his game alive? What does he need to do?
Well, I think that there's a couple concepts. I came up with a list I call psychotronic gaming. We talk about it on my Discord a lot. And anyone's welcome to join my Discord. It's very active. It's not nearly as active as Alex's ACKS Discord, which is a paragon of creativity, and I'm impressed. But the things I really boil down to are three very important things and you can miss one or two others. One, verisimilitude. The game world has to make sense inside itself.
Preach.
Right? It has to make sense internally. Two, status quo is the enemy. If the players change something, let them change it. Right? This is I can't remember his name, darn it, but the guy talking about the quantum ogre. That is true at a macro level.
Courtney
I
Campbell.
hope that this villain would challenge them on their 5th level, but they kill them on their 3rd. I'll make a new villain just like him. No, don't do that.
Yep.
If they blow something up, it's blown up, right?
Yep.
So verisimilitude, status quo is the enemy, and last but not least, players drive the action. The players decide what their characters are going to do and where they're going to go. You don't railroad them. You don't say, hey, the only thing you can do tonight is fight this. Have multiple things that you can do and leave it out there. As a matter of fact, my wife, who has been a player in my campaign for 34 years, God bless her, once described it this way. I've got a bunch. My campaign is actually just a bunch of geodetic tiles, geomorphs, right? There are orcs to the west. There's 4 nations to the south. There's barbarians to the north. There's evil elves over here. And the players can arrange those tiles however they want. I don't tell them how to arrange them, right? You're going to hear rumors. You're going to know about, there's massive treasure in this mountain, on and on and on. But when I sit down beforehand, like right now, I'm actually doing it for this weekend. We got a game Friday night. I tell the players, what are you guys going to do? You tell me. I never tell them what they're doing.
Right.
So players drive the action. Internal verisimilitude and status quo of the enemy are the real core as to why I think my campaign's lasting.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about world verisimilitude. Right now, there's a pretty big movement of fantasy Braunsteins happening online.
Sure.
Some of them are experimenting with what you might call a shared authorial power, where the patrons, in addition to being domain level rulers, are also given the ability to more or less invent areas of the world. Is that something you've done? Would you consider that a good thing, or would you consider that a bad thing?
It's not something I've done. At the level they do it, I know a lot of these guys. I've known them since they started doing this. The level they do it, I would never permit. If you've got a PC that's running a domain, he goes, well, I'm going to build a village, and here's the layout of the streets. Absolutely, that's your job. If you were to come to me and say, well, I didn't know what was beyond this mountain range, so I got out the DMG and I rolled a bunch of random terrain, and that's what's beyond the mountain range. I'm like, no, it's not. That's not how it works. Absolutely not. And I'll tell you why. This is actually weird, because people always get like, really? Back when I was playing, my friend, Brian, was building a campaign from scratch, and he was using random terrain generation. And he wanted another friend of mine, Eric, to help him out. And they ran into a place where they rolled different terrain for the same 20 hexes, and they're like, it led to a fight. And if you're sharing that level of DM control, then there's no world.
Right.
There's just no world there. There's competing arguments about what the world's going to be, and that means that suddenly your players aren't playing anymore; they're dungeon mastering. And if you want to do that, just have them create their own game world, and then you can move back and forth with plane shift, the Vasty Deep, or don't even explain it. It's I don't have to explain nothing. They used an elevator. I don't care.
All right, so let's talk about the Vasty Deep, because that actually sounds like something that we could shamelessly steal in the ACKS community.
I encourage people to steal the hell out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us about it. How does it work? How does time pass in the two different worlds? Everything.
Okay, so the way that I typically do the Vasty Deep is, if a ship is at least one full day out of sight of all lands,
okay,
preferably 3, then I do a roll under on the intelligence of the person that's in charge of guiding the ship. For every successful time they've gone from the world they're in, the world they're going to, they get a +1 to their effective intelligence to a maximum of +4.
Okay.
If they fail, they just don't go anywhere and they can sail back home. But once they get inside of land, they can go back out of sight of land and try again.
Okay.
Very straightforward. And if you've got one of the rare maps of the Vasty Deep, then you just say, oh, I just go. Okay.
Okay.
And that's it. Now, the way that we roll time is we track time in the world you're going to, and that's how long you're gone in all worlds.
Okay.
That's it. You spend 13 days in Tanilda. You also spent 13 days in Seaward, and 13 days in Joe's world, and 13 days in Mary's campaign at the same time.
So what happens? So let's say I go into Bob's campaign world. I get over there. We get really excited about domain play. 20 years passes. Then I sail back to your world. How would you handle that?
That's been done.
Okay, let's hear it. Yeah, this is great.
Sure. So, excuse me. In 1987, we had excuse me, let me change that around a little bit. In 1992 is going to be a better example. In 1992, John was playing a thief that domained.
Okay.
And he had played primarily in Tanilda, but it had occasionally come to Seaward. Okay. So he was known in both campaigns. He actually had built a hidey hole in my super dungeon. That's what I called my mega dungeon years ago. So he's got a little apartment in the dungeon. And he's like, no, I'm going to domain in Tanilda. So he domains in Tanilda. Years go by. I have not seen John physically in 8 years, year 2000. I get a letter from him saying, "Hey, I'm working on because Danilo was still running them. I need X, Y, and Z that I've got at my apartment in Skull Mountain. My character needs to go get it. Can you figure that out for me?" So he had included a write up of his character. That's how long ago this was, kids. I did encounters, did everything for him. He went to the mountain. He got the stuff from the mountain. He came back, and I said, "You did fine. You earned 1,400 experience points from killing monsters, and you used one of your potions of healing, but you got all your stuff in your back. Thanks, man. We're good." And frankly, other than that, all I've heard from him is Merry Christmas and things are doing well. So that works out, and that's fine. And if that, and there's a couple other people that can still happen. Sure.
Now, is he still playing that character then in Lou's campaign?
No, unfortunately, Lou's campaign came to an end. I want to say in 2009.
Got it.
So he has not run it in quite some time, about 15 years. Crying Shame is a great campaign. I can talk about the attack upon the Cathedral of Evil in Tanilda for hours. It was one of the best sessions I've ever been in.
Awesome. All right, we got another question from Michael Guy. He says, Rick, you said once, why so much player investment? The really, really short answer is in my campaign, torches burn for an hour and weigh 2.5 pounds. So let's explain.
Well, thank you, Michael. That's actually, I think, my second most popular blog article. So what it boils down to is this. If you are strict about the resource management rules in the campaign, meaning, well, how many torches you have? 10. That's 25 pounds. You have 25 pounds of encumbrance, etc. And, you got 10 torches and you're going to be in there 4 days. That's going to be enough. That means that you have to interact with NPCs. You have to. Because you have to have torches and food. You have to have porters to carry stuff. You have to hire mules. You've got to get fodder for mules. And that cascades into your characters having meaningful interactions with NPCs. So suddenly, it does matter to them that this was a very bad winter that you rolled on your random winter charts. And there's no fodder in the spring because you can't feed the mules that you want to take up the mountain to get your treasure out. Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, you can't get, I really want to get the treasure out of these mules. Well, there's nothing to feed them. The mules will die.
Right.
Holy moly, we have to go help the peasants grow wheat. I mean, it sounds really simple. But again, it's part of the verisimilitude. Verisimilitude can't just be that a blessed spell always kills, this monster. It also has to be, you've got to find a place where your food's coming from because that's realistic.
Exactly. All right, so let's actually compare this way of thinking about games to a way of thinking about old school gaming that happens on another Discord, which is the Pedantic Discord. It's one of the other ones that's really active, has a broad overlap with the ACKS Discord.
Why don't you join? Because I love an active Discord, sure.
Yeah, so now they call their hobby, they call it fantasy adventure gaming to differentiate it from what they see as role playing, which has become like a misused word that leads into story games and things like that. And so they take the view, I would say, that rather than the world being primary, the game is primary. And they have, for instance, one of the things they talk about is it's totally okay to metagame and use your player knowledge that your character doesn't have, because the point is to win the game, and they're not necessarily trying to simulate a world. Or likewise, they kind of frown on funny voices or play acting, and they think it's better to just keep that to a minimum to keep the focus on the game action. So how close does that align to your views versus like simulationism?
Well, we don't do a lot of funny voices. Well, I do, to differentiate between NPCs. We don't do a lot of funny voices or anything, although oddly enough, you always know when everyone's speaking in character and when they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Which I find very interesting psychologically.
Mm-hmm.
Using any metagame knowledge, I find that a little odd.
Mm-hmm.
Simply because you're doing that, you're not really playing different player characters, in my opinion.
Right. That's right.
Here's an
and
example.
Well, hang on before you do.
Yeah,
and
sure.
That's basically their argument, is that you're not really, this is why they call it fantasy adventure gaming, is you're not really playing a character. The character is just the avatar of you.
Well, then you suddenly have broken down the core concept of what a player character is, and you've erased a great deal of what a player character is. This is, frankly, this is first blush because I'm just thinking about this. This is in a very real way no different than the people like, oh, how are we going to solve this problem? And they look at the character sheet for a skill rather than thinking of some unusual thing. It's another version of piloting the mech or whatever that phrase is. Oh, well, this is just a particular set of skills that me, the metagamer, is using to overcome this obstacle. Okay, fine. Then just get rid of all the races, get rid of all the classes, and go to a raceless, classless system, and just admit that you're just metagaming and doing that. You're not going to need anything other than, well, this is level 7 overlord, not the king of this nation, or this all the other stuff that is part and parcel of role playing just goes away. And I guess that's fine. I'm not going to tell them if they're having fun, I'm not going to tell them it's wrong, or if that's the way they prefer to play. I'm not going to say that they're a bad person. But I think they're going to miss a lot of the charm, and I mean that the charm and emotional investment that comes with D&D. How many times have you heard a player discuss what a PC did as if they watched a real person do it? Or even as if they themselves had done that? And a great deal of that is, it doesn't take a lot. You don't have to wear a costume. You don't have to speak with a French accent. You don't have to eat nothing but hardtack and beef jerky and water while you're playing. It's relatively simple to get that, but to do that, you have to think of that player character as a unique instance within the rules. That's just my opinion.
Right. Now, obviously, I don't think I have any of the pedantics on today, which is unfortunate, because if anybody was on, I would ask them to evaluate whether or not I accurately represent.
Now, again, there's a point that I don't think that, especially been playing a long time. I've got some players who've been playing a long time, and it's really hard for them to turn off the metagaming, which is one of the reasons why I often mess with the metagame. I talk about that. For example, people have found out the hard way that in Seaward, Rakshasa are not killed by bolts that have had bless cast upon them. It's a different spell called Consecration, and only an NPC class can cast that spell. And that was a real rough shock. Now it's internally consistent.
Right.
But there are little metagames, like I don't have Drow, I don't have Beholders.
Right.
I got other monsters that take their place.
Right.
So there's a little bit of that going on, but it's almost impossible to turn that off,
It is. Yeah. So I think the view that the pedantics take is that there's a very slippery slope when you start getting into the concept of, quote, role play that quickly degenerates into, I think they derisively call it like theater kid story games or something like that.
Well, this is actually interesting because one of my longtime players and I had a big discussion about that very topic this morning. And the way we look at it between what I would call traditional old school play and story gaming is this. Imagine a season of baseball. Okay, old school baseball is you watch the season and, oh my gosh, this player got hit by a ball and injured him and he's out for 4 games. And that's an emotional event. And this guy suddenly, he out of nowhere, he started performing very well. He had a hot streak and he saved the team. And this is a crushing victory. And that happens. But nobody's planning it. Nobody's plotted this out. But at the end of the season, you can sit down, and a good sports writer can sit down and turn that into a narrative that describes the entire season about how the scrappy underdogs came back and won the World Series.
Right.
Which happens. Then the other one is you write a screenplay for a baseball game, and the screenwriter plots out, well, at this time this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And at the end of the movie, the scrappy underdog will have won the World Series. Now, those are radically different. They're both fun. I love live baseball. I love baseball. My wife and I listen to baseball every day during the season, et cetera, et cetera. But I also really like Major League. I think it's a great movie, and so on and so forth. And where's the difference in those two things come from? I don't know anybody that has an old school approach to it's an emergent narrative, like a memoir. We have no plots. We have no planned events. There's no big bad battle where you have to wait to your 16th level to fight them. None of that. Who's played a character for more than 4 or 5 sessions, it doesn't have a plan where they want them to go. At least a little bit. Man, I want to get a really good shield and maybe a magical spear. That's still a plan, right? And does that mean that they're suddenly story gaming? I don't think so.
Right.
I think that slider between 1 and 10 of really, really pure non-story gaming and really, really pure story gaming, I think most people are down at somewhere in the 3s or 4s or 7s or 8s. And that's fine. And you can move back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as people really enjoy being surprised by completely unscripted games, like I do, that's the way I do it. You also have to understand that I've been playing Champion since 1985, and I have a game that's going to be, I know it's going to hit 2 decades old. And in Champions, you sometimes do plan that there's going to be a big showdown where the villain has a soliloquy, and he gets to make his speech before anybody can do anything about it. And then there's a big show, and they're both fine.
Right.
They're different, and I think that certain game mechanics and systems are much more designed to do one or the other. Like Champions is designed for at least some cinematic elements, minimum.
Mm-hmm.
D&D, in my opinion, really isn't, but you can do it. And I don't think you can say that categorically that's not how you do a role-playing game, because role-playing games, that's a huge span of things. Role-playing games is not Dungeons and Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a guy who's been playing D&D since he was 9. That's not all there is. There's a huge range of things that can be called a role-playing game, legitimately.
Right.
And there's so many people doing story gaming that I can't say that they're not having fun. That's not how I prefer to play generally. But when I have done it, I've had fun.
So my differentiation point for story gaming comes from a concept which I'm going to steal from the Forge. They called it stance. And the Forge took the position that stance was irrelevant to whether or not something was a role-playing game. And I take the position that stance is determinative of whether something is a role-playing game. And stance is the relationship you have to the game world. So and towards your character. And so the stances, there is the pawn stance, where the game is a game and you're moving a pawn around. And then there is the agent stance or actor stance, where the character is an independent character who is your agent of action in the world, or whom you are, or is the means by which you act. And then finally, there's the author stance or director stance, where the game is a story, a narrative, a movie, and you are the author or co-author of that movie. And so I think story gaming per se, so role play, whatever, funny voices, whatever you want to call it, is fine up to the point that you have the agent stance. I think it becomes a different genre of game when you move into that author stance. And I'll give an example of what I mean. So let's say we're playing a horror game and my character is driving their car down the highway, and the GM knows that the evil haunted mansion has an effect on mechanical devices. And so as I cross within sight of the haunted mansion, it causes my car to break down. So now my car is broken down and there's a big scary haunted mansion. And it's left to me to decide what to do. Do I walk down the highway and try and find help? Do I wait? Can't use my cell phone because something's disrupting it. Or do I go into the house? So this is a horror setup. And it's all within the game world. Conversely, in a story game, you would have a situation where the character is driving down the highway and he sees a big scary house and he says, you know, it would be really dramatically interesting if my car broke down here. And so then he's like, so GM, I want my car to break down here so I can have an interesting story of exploring this house. And a lot of modern story games are built for that sort of thing. So they're giving...
It's true. I've seen some, yeah.
Yeah, like Fiasco works like that. I think it would be really dramatic if. And to me, that's a different genre. That's as different a genre from role-playing game as role-playing game is from chess, for instance. And so I try to not have those type of mechanics in my games. But if you look at my game Ascendant, it's very much like a mission-based. The GM sets up a mission and you go experience the mission as my recommended way.
Matter of fact, may I take it aside to say I love Ascendant, and this is from somebody who's been playing Champion since '85. And with the permission you gave me, I'm actually taking my official setting book for hero games and trying to convert it to Ascendant. It's a wonderful system.
Awesome.
But I agree, it's mission based, not, oh my goodness, suddenly I want to do X. Let me do X. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very difficult to do a sandbox superhero game when you have characters that, for instance, can teleport around the world in an instant. You're like, okay, there's no conceivable way that the GM can prepare for that. So you're either doing an absolute zero prep, free Kriegspiel with superpowers of some sort, or they have some mission that's coming from some third party that the GM can reliably assume they're going to try and handle.
I'm going to brag a little bit. I do have a bit of player agency in the Atlantiverse. But it's more of a list of 3 to 5 things you can try today. Not. Yeah. It's not even close to a sandbox. I mean, Seaward's a true sandbox and has been for a long time.
Right.
But I agree with you 100%. I mean, like you said, well, I can see the future and teleport through space time, thousands of light years. We got to be. Here's what you can do today.
Yeah, I mean, when I was running the Ascendant playtest, the group would attempt to mess with me as much as possible by doing things I didn't expect, and it became like this game of cat and mouse as to whether or not they were going to outthink me by doing something I couldn't handle. And I ended up having to like pre-generate Denny's because they used to like to teleport to the local Denny's. And so for every location that a battle would take place, like before the game session, I'm like looking up the Denny's and to find out what its street address is and what it's
hilarious.
And I'm sitting there thinking,
Waffle Houses in the Atlantiverse. It's the Waffle House they always go to,
right? And I'm sitting there worried. I'm like, what if they go to Chili's? What am I going to do, right?
So I can't believe you guys always go to Denny's and mine always go to Waffle House.
Yeah. And I wonder if there's some other campaign out there where they're going to Applebee's, right? Like, maybe, yeah. But based on your talking about the, what is it called? The deep sea, the
Vasty Deep.
Vasty Deep. Can you spell that in the chat?
Sure.
Yeah.
I got the idea from a poem that my 9th grade English teacher had me read.
So I really think we could use that as a means to do a shared universe of ACKS campaigns, where basically if you sail out into the Tehenare, which is our equivalent of the Atlantic Ocean, if you sail out into that away from shore, then you can sail into another ACKS campaign. And I wonder if folks would be into that. If you're watching this, if you're into the idea, let me know in the chat because that would be pretty neat. What would happen? What would happen if you?
Really good question.
What he asked?
And he asked, how much time do I commit to getting ready for sessions, especially between? And I told him I'd cheat. So let me put it this way. I just had a massive, player characters bringing over 500 soldiers in. We had to get out the mass combat rules. We're doing literally chainmail style huge wars. So on the one hand, it took me about 20 minutes to get ready for that. On the other hand, that's because I got 45 years of notes set up. So, like everything about the Orcish armies, their resources, magic items, everything else, I've had that for 30 years. So I did, hours and hours of prep over the course space of 4 or 5 years, and I've got it sitting in a notebook. So, we're going to finally attack these guys. So that's going to take me about 10 minutes, but not really, you know what I mean? One of my big examples from inside the system, and I really hate to interrupt you, Alex, but I wanted to ask these questions, was we were in a session and one of my player characters like, well, I'm going to search around the camp. I'm like, you find, I think it was 2,000 copper pieces hidden behind a log. What? Okay. And he asked me later, why is it there? And I said, back in the 80s, a party was over encumbered, so they left it there and they never came back.
Amazing.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, and I would agree. The longer I run a campaign, the shorter my prep time gets. Particularly the early sessions, I am very, very prep intensive as I'm building out the world. I spent months actually when I did my Lord of the Rings ACKS campaign. I spent months like going back to the original source material, reading the history of Middle Earth, taking all these notes, getting obscure MERP source books. But then once I had done all of that, my actual session prep, what I aim for is in the first couple months, I try and get it down to 1 hour per hour of play. And then once I have it going, I hope to try and get it down to like 1 hour per session is my own goal.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I mean, you're probably the same boat I am. I'm not doing any prep for a session, but I had this idea last night, so I'm going to spend 2 hours a day adding to the campaign, not for a particular session. And that could pay off in 4 months or 4 years.
Yeah, I do that. I do that a lot. Well, for me, it works out because it also is my day job now. So whatever I end up creating for the one, I get to leverage into the other, and it it works out. It works out pretty well. So like the Pirates campaign I'm currently running is going to become an ACKS supplement, and I think it'll be a good supplement. It's good fun.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Pretty sure we already thought about doing that. So Draco Stripe says, how do you keep all your notes organized? This is a good question.
Okay, so I currently have what I call 8 active notebooks for Seaward. And those are old school college ruled notebooks. And one of them is an index of what's in the other notebooks. And then I have in my basement, I think it's now 52 other notebooks.
Wow.
And there's a couple indexes down there as well. I thought about digitizing them, but holy moly.
Right.
I don't think it's ever going to happen. And I also have, I think it is 18. I'd have to look. It's quite a bit of maps and stuff that are digital. I didn't digitize my maps starting about 12 years ago. So a lot of my visual stuff like maps and stuff has been digitized, but most of the rest is still handwritten. But as time goes on, I'm trying to translate especially over the last 5 years, a lot of new stuff I'm doing is also digital at the same time.
Yeah.
It's very difficult though, because you have to understand, when I started doing this stuff, convincing somebody to mimeograph your stuff was uphill. And for all you kids out there, if you ever get an old book of player character sheets from TSR from the 70s, it's like, why are they this weird orange color? That's because they didn't photocopy. You had to buy a new book rather than taking them in and photocopy them. And back then, photocopies were $1 a page.
Yeah.
So so everyone came with their character sheets. You wrote them on a sheet of paper. But yeah, I'm very analog. Luckily, my oldest son is aware of how my system works. And the plan is right now that when I eventually do pass, he's going to take over the campaign and keep it running.
That's amazing. Yeah, I remember those days. Like when I got my first dot matrix printer for my Commodore 64, I thought I was the bee's knees, man. I was printing out stuff and I'm like, look how professional this looks.
Oh yeah.
It was a different era. Sorry.
Yeah, my first laptop, Lou Pulsar gave it to me. It was one of the old Sparks with 2 floppy drives. One was to run the program and the other one was to store the data.
Yeah. So my brother joined the chat earlier, Willie. So he was the person who taught me to play Dungeons and Dragons years ago. He was he's your age. I think he's 9 years older than me, so a couple of years older than you. Had learned to play Dungeons and Dragons in the D&D club in school, and then all of my AD&D first edition stuff is hand-me-downs that he gave me, and the Commodore 64 was his computer hand-me-down to me. Yeah, so he's playing in my my Grey Brotherhood campaign as well. So we've got literally put the 35-year-old band back together. It's pretty fun. Here's a question. Okay. So talking about the longevity of a campaign. All right. So I have gone on the record as saying that you cannot run a rules light game for a long campaign, because by the time you finish the long campaign, it will no longer be rules light, right?
Well, yeah, because every time you make a ruling, that's not a rule.
It's now a rule. Exactly. And so my question for you is, are there games that you think are better or worse at this point on the market for someone who says, I want to run a long-term campaign? Like, which games are good for it? And which games would you be like, you're a crazy man to try and run long-term with that? I have my own thoughts, but I want yours.
Okay, so let me go insane here a little bit.
All right.
If you don't care about genre and your mechanics neutral, I'd say if I start over, it would be Hero System or GURPS.
Okay.
Right? It's very robust. It's very flexible. You mentioned earlier, GURPS has about 4 metric tons of supplement books.
Mm-hmm.
And you can model anything. Really, and especially with Hero, you have, I should say with both of them, you have many examples of how to model anything. So if your bones are good, you've got a good idea for campaign. You're making sure the players are invested, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't matter if they want to play a spy game or fight dragons. You can do it. And I think that would be a good system. Now, that being said, Hero System in particular is notorious for, I hope you like math.
Mm-hmm.
And behind it, and you're going to be interested in this one. The second one I would say is D6, another universal system. Matter of fact, my wife and I met on a blind date arranged by mutual friends and went to dinner. Our first actual let's go on a date was we played Star Wars D6.
Interesting. Okay. I played that game, a lot of it. Yeah.
Again, D6, you can model a lot of things. It's got a very simple mechanic that's easy to understand. It's a D6 die pool. It's very flexible. There's a lot of support materials. So if you're going to say, I want a rules light-ish system that I think will last a long time, I'd really honestly say D6. And the reason I say that is this. I adore D&D, AD&D First Edition in particular. I obviously like the system. It is a muscle car that needs a lot of maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of moving parts. It can take you a long time to master all the rules. If you want to play, you should. I encourage everyone to play. If you want to play D&D First Edition, do as close to rules as written as possible in every way you can. For as long as possible, you've got to learn how it works before you can start modifying it, make it make sense.
Yep.
But when the thing is there's a lot of systems where you don't have to ride it that close and mess with the carburetor and the choke, etc. at the same time. And if you're a brand new player who has no other experience, I would really encourage a nice, simple generic system like D6. If you're a glutton for punishment and you want to model anything, I want to do Durenye, I want to do Lord of the Rings, I want to do anything like that. Well, if you're a glutton for punishment, do Rollmaster. Because frankly, if you're looking at fantasy, if you want to replicate a fantasy fiction, Rollmaster is the best at that. Now, I'm not saying it's the best role-playing game for fantasy. I'm saying it's the best at replicating fantasy fiction. You can do the Wizard of Oz with Rollmaster. You can do Lord of the Rings with Rollmaster. Very famously, they did. You can do Dying Sun with Rollmaster, and you're like, I don't have to change any rules. I just have to limit what classes they can play. But if you're going to do that, you'd better be ready to know all the rules. So going back to your actual original question, if somebody come to me and say, I want to start a campaign, I've never really done a game master before, and I want something where I can do rules light and have a long campaign, I'd say D6.
Okay, interesting. So my own take on it is, and I think this carves out AD&D as special, it carves out ACKS as special, is I think for long campaigns, you want games where the gameplay can qualitatively shift for the player over time, right? So like D&D 5e and particularly D&D 4e were actually carefully designed so that the way the game, quote, feels at early levels is similar to how it feels at mid levels, is similar to how it feels at high levels. They basically said there's a sweet spot for how the game plays, and we want to try and have everything feel sweet spot the whole way through. And And you also see that in a lot of MMOs, and people start to talk about, oh,
Sure.
it's the
Yeah.
grind or whatever. Whereas AD&D from the outset makes it clear that as you advance in level, the game is going to change, right? And whether it changes because
Radically.
you become
Yeah.
a domain ruler and you have henchmen and mercenaries working for you, or you might start traveling the outer planes and stuff
Mhm.
becomes really gonzo, but there's this built-in change. And
Absolutely.
and so that's been a really core part of ACKS. So I've been thinking lately about science fiction as a genre. There's a lot of interest within the ACKS community of some sort of science fiction ACKS. It's like, okay, what does that change for science fiction? Do you become a fleet commander? Do you become the captain of a hammer slammers mercenary battalion?
Great books.
Intergalactic ruler? Like, what is it? What is it that changes?
If you're playing Traveler, you get rich.
Yeah, playing Traveler, you get rich, but and Traveler does actually have subsystems for if you wanted to run, mass combat.
Yep.
It does have some. They're not widely used, but they exist.
Crying shame because High Guard is a great system.
So I haven't played High Guard, but I do know they used to have the million credit squadron in War Game.
Trillion credit squadron.
Trillion quadrants credit, yeah. The trillion credit squadron in War Game. So it can be done. Yeah, it can be done. My problem with Traveler is that every time I've tried to get a campaign of Traveler going, my players don't like it because the characters feel too samey. My particular set of players, the people I tend to have played with, really like for the games to have mechanical differentiation between characters, which is why ACKS has proficiencies. Because we took BX, but BX doesn't have a lot of mechanical differentiation between characters. Every fighter is a fighter. So ACKS has proficiencies, it has more classes, and so you have more opportunity for mechanical differentiation. In Traveler, every guy with Pilot 2 is about as good as every other guy with Pilot 2, and there's really no way to differentiate that. In contrast to, let's say, Battle Stations, which is a game where you've got all these fun little perks that you can take. So that, yeah, I'm a Pilot 2 and you're Pilot 2, but you're really good in fighters and I'm better at capital ships, and you can do really good at maneuvers, but I'm really good at engine efficiency. And people, my groups at least, seem to really get into that. Niche protection, as Arthur says. Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that that's one of the things that people forget. When second edition came out, there was a lot of excitement about it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people grabbed it right away because, and I remember very clearly a player at me and Lou were sitting there and we're getting ready to play in Seaward, and we're looking through it, and he said, if I've got a fifth level halfling thief with an 18 dex, and you get a 15th level halfling, a same level halfling thief with a 15 dex, the only difference between the characters is magic items, maybe hit points. But in second edition, with the tuning, your halfling fighter, a thief with a 15 dex, can be a boxman who's all about picking locks, finding traps, moving traps, picking locks. Mine can be all about stealth, moving silently, and that's very exciting. And that differentiation, there was a lot of excitement and buzz, and a lot of people just grabbed second edition and loved it.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons why my wife, it's her favorite version, especially with skills and powers, which I keep a tight rein on, because you can have the same race, the exact same stats, the exact same class, and be radically different characters. And some people love that. Some people need that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I quite like second edition. I feel like it gets a pretty harsh rap, but I quite like second edition. I think David Zeb Cook is a really, really good game designer.
Sure.
What he did with basic D&D, second edition, the Zephyr's Conan system is one of my favorites.
The 2D20 system, yeah.
Yeah, so no, not the 2D20. No, this was the 1984 Conan RPG.
That one, yes. I can't believe I owned that. I can't believe I could.
Yeah, right. That was a really neat system. That was one of the early systems to use a color chart for resolution of tasks, which I used for Ascendant. Absolutely great system. So, all right, we got a great question. Neither of them answered what game is the worst for long-term play. So I would say virtually all of the story games that are coming out, and are terrible for long-term play. And in fact, they're specifically designed not for long-term play.
You beat me to it. I've seen some explicitly storytelling game, and like you said, Welp, I resolved my story arc let's move on to the next story. You're done.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of my big complaints that I had with everything from the Dragonlance books, modules, and everything else to the remake of to the Conan movies. Both the original and the next one is the original Conan in the books was just easily bored. He was literally just an easily bored guy that wants to go over the next horizon and have fun. So there's always an excuse for him, like, that was great, let's do the next thing. When you start using the hero's journey on everybody, there's a conclusion, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, like in the one with Jason Momoa, oh, you killed the guy who killed your dad. Well, you can go back and be a farmer now. You're done. And a lot of the story games have that. Well, there's going to be a climax, and then a denouement, and then okay, we'll go back to being a farmer. And there's no reason for you to keep adventuring. And I think it kills all the tension. Well,
yeah.
Once Inigo Montoya kills the guy, the six-fingered man, what's he going to do?
Right, exactly. All right, so Michael Guy asked another great question. I'm going to answer this one here. So he says, an ACKS campaign has an existential threat that puts a clock on it, so it ends after a few years with victory or defeat. Rick does a forever one. Can you guys compare? All right, so let me actually answer that one. My campaign doesn't per se end when the existential threat is resolved. It simply transforms. So in the Arn Empire campaign, after they defeated the last Sorcerer King and split off from the Arn Empire, all of the original group of characters had reached maximum level, but their henchmen had not. And so all that happened was we switched over to playing the henchmen, and the henchmen then went on to have new adventures. And they actually built a flying ship, and they flew to the moon and began to conquer the moon. And we stopped the campaign at that point, not because people had lost interest in going on, but it was more that we had one of our key players had some life changes. Another guy had to move to across the country. And so there was just like this kind of real life loss of momentum that came in. But there was no reason that couldn't have gone on, I think, as long as you maintain the world. And so my current campaign is set in the same game world. The Pirates campaign is set in the same game world a couple years later. So I'm not very far removed from Rick. He and I think, are very philosophically aligned on that.
Agreed.
I think the ticking time clock is just a very good way to. I'll speak to this philosophically. What I discovered was that although I myself was happy to roleplay as an iron-fisted conqueror who would destroy all who crossed him just for the pure pleasure of conquest, a lot of my players were much more squeamish, and they didn't want to be Genghis Khan. In some way, they wanted to feel like they were good guys. And so I came up with this idea that make all of the NPCs basically laughably awful or incompetent, and then create this external threat. And then the players are forced, for the greater good, they're forced to conquer the world in order to save everybody. And it was just kind of like a mind twist to get them to be willing to be Genghis Khan, because they weren't willing to do it for the sake of conquest and might makes right, but they were willing to be Genghis Khan if it meant, oh well, someone had to do it to save the world. So anyway, if you've got players who are just, ruthless Vlad the Impaler types, you could do without the existential threat and just let them be ruthless Vlad the Impalers, and they'll have a good time. But I found from now running many, many campaigns that most people nowadays, aren't as sanguine about conquest for the sake of conquest. And so we wanted to have some system there. Let's see.
In the meantime, I just had 3 PCs attack and conquer 3 separate Orca city states just to make the domains.
Yeah.
And flexing the scrubs. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Holden, was the moon made of cheese? No. So I actually did. The moon was kind of a post-apocalyptic science fiction setting, and it was good fun. We used a lot of stuff from Carcosa, which was a kind of a hip supplement around circa 2010 when I was running it. Let's see. Arthur says Dungeon World has interesting prompts, but good lore. Yeah, exactly. There's no long-term campaign in Dungeon World. Dunder Moose, what is a mechanic you got excited for that just didn't make the cut, and why? There are no.
I can see one. I
All
was
right, do
working
it.
in D&D for alternate combat values, like a concept of a mighty blow, where you could do 50% more damage than normal, or they could step back to avoid the damage 100%. And attempt to push people around the board. And that did not. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be great. We can, get some tactical space. No, it ended up that the monsters just kept pushing the party together and beating their ass. So I dropped it.
Yeah. For me, it was the shields must be splintered rule, which was the idea that you could absorb a blow on your shield, and then the shield is destroyed, and you don't take the damage. And my players immediately responded by just hiring shield bearers and bringing tons and tons of shields into the dungeon. And it was
see, yeah, that's a common one.
Yeah. So that one definitely didn't work out. As far as other mechanics that make the cut, given my rule books ended up at 1,500 pages, I'm maybe not the best person to talk to about cutting mechanics they're excited about.
Yeah, well, I was about to say my trimmed down export book of house rules, which I call Far Realms, is only 108 pages. Yeah.
Only. All right. So you said you have about 10 minutes left. So let's get a couple questions in for Rick before he has to jet.
Unfortunately, my beautiful wife wants to ply me with adult beverages in her company. So,
I mean, this is a difficult thing, but
right.
Men have to do what they have to do.
Yeah, get back to the salt mines. Right.
Yeah, exactly. My beautiful wife is currently feeding our rescue puppy Maximus Magnus his delicious organic raw meat superfood.
Like the farmer's dog stuff or something.
Yeah, cool. Exactly. This dog eats better than I do. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, sounds like my wife's cat. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it, John. Thanks, Jacobs. Thanks for saying that. One thing that I find interesting is I have a lot of people ask me, how'd you get your campaign to last this long? I've been having them ask me that since it was about 34 years old. And I didn't even realize that it was kind of unusual at the time. Very insular I was. I was busy raising 5 kids and being sick. But I hate to say it, but right at the very end, I've just never quit playing, loving the game, and I like the campaign and the things that happened. I should see if I can pull it up. I actually want to show. I should have had this ready. I've always wanted to show exactly how important player characters are, and how status quo is the enemy means. Because the tremendous amount of change in the campaign is not me. And there's no way around that. It's the players. And that, I think, keeps it going. See if I can do this. Maybe. So I'm not sure if I can pull this off. Yeah, there it is. I'm going to try to share something. I hope you'll let me do that, Alex. Can you see that, guys, at all?
Boom. All right. I think I've shared it.
Okay. So the City of Seaward, I made that. The terrain, you see, I made that. The Skull Mountain, that's my super dungeon. So the terrain I made, this city I made, and this I made. This I made. Everything else is player characters. Right?
Wow.
Yep. These are all domains. And this is out of date. I have to update this. There's a new domain here. There's a domain here. There's a domain here. There's a domain here. There's a domain here. One here. And there's now 3 more out here. So the secret, I think, to a long campaign is, in a real way, the advancement is the player's advancement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I've had a lot of players over the years with very different levels of interaction, very different outlooks towards the game. And the campaign has survived, I think, simply because regardless of their level of investment, regardless of their outlook on what the game is itself, they're allowed to change it, so it never gets stale.
Right. Right. So D. Breton says, which new mechanic worked really well? And Arthur wants to know, what's your opinion on non-weapon proficiencies? Do you use them, or are you a secondary skill roll guy?
A mechanic that worked well, I have to say my initiative system, I have had scores of players come in my game, use my initiative system and say, holy moly, it's first edition and the combat went fast and zippy and it was exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very proud of that one. And what was the other question there?
Non-weapon proficiencies.
You know, it's tough. I don't, and not in first edition. I save them for my second edition campaign. But at the same time, there's 3 character PCs that know Kung Fu from Yashima, so it's mostly no. Yeah.
So I would say for ACKS, the new mechanic that worked really well was cleaving. That's proven to be, I think, very, very successful. And I would say the shadowy senses for thieves has worked really well in ACKS too.
For sure. Yeah.
Heartbreaker for Rick, ACKS or D&D. I'm not sure what he's asking, but I'm not sure.
Oh, Heartbreaker. Well, I've got a concept called Lance and Tome, and I'm taking all of my house rules and turning them into a first edition clone.
There you go. So there's your Heartbreaker.
I've been working on that for a while. I was really interrupted by almost dying 3 times in the last 3 years. Kind of slowed me down a little bit, but I'm doing fine. I've got some guys on my Discord that have a section I called "It Ain't Done," which is the section so far. So we've had some active play testing going on for about 2 years, 3 years. So my Heartbreaker is a first edition D&D with all my house rules involved. Yeah, with no spells, no bestiary, no equipment, and no magic items. It's 300 pages, so it's not going anywhere.
Oh, Holden, we can't ask him that. We can't ask him that. So.
You know, well, that's an easy one for me, simply because Seaward's D&D.
Yeah.
Right. I've got 2 D&D campaigns, and one of them I've been playing since literally my 12th birthday. So there it is. I mean, that's not dissing ACKS in any way. Actually, one of the most popular channels on my Discord is the guys talking about ACKS.
Indeed.
Alex, we summon them all the time. And there you have it. One of my sons actually is a big ACKS nerd and talks about it a lot. Yeah. But
all right, Black Lodge wants to know differences between first edition and second edition D&D.
Meaningful. They're meaningful, but they're not as meaningful as some people say. Oddly enough, I think one of the biggest problems between first edition and second edition, and I mean this is a problem, is power creep. Second edition dragons are orders of magnitude more powerful than first edition dragons.
Yeah, they are.
And some of the spells in second edition are orders of magnitude more powerful than spells in first edition. And that can cause a real problem. For example, here's a prime example. The original version of Stone Skin, which was a first edition spell from Dragon Magazine, is about 1/30th as powerful as the second edition version of the spell Stone Skin, and it's the same level. So I think that's a huge difference there. Oddly enough, I don't think that non-weapon proficiencies are that important to the mechanics, but they're shockingly important to long-term play. And I'll tell you why. One of the most valuable things in Blackstone, my second edition campaign, are books that give you bonuses to non-weapon proficiencies.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's a subtly different, but still they're different games because of those things.
Yeah. So, Sir Talk a lot. Yeah, it's not just a bit of power creep. Characters in ACKS II are definitely more powerful than those in BX. Particularly the fighters, because they get to cleave. The thieves can see in the dark, and so absolutely an ACKS II character is more powerful than a BX character. Now, what's different is that an ACKS II mage is not necessarily more powerful than a high-level BX magic user. And so what I tried to do was balance out the power level of everyone relative to the power level of high-level mages. So, all right. So Rick is saying, thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Yeah,
Alex. I guess you have to head out. Yep.
So you're talking about high level mages. One thing I want to say on the way out, just before I go in, beyond, thank you so much, Alex, for having me on. Thank you, everyone, for the questions. Is that a lot of people understand about high level D&D play is this: the margin between life and death gets narrower and narrower once you hit 9th level and keep going up. Here's an example. We recently had a party that attacked Baba Yaga and won. But here's what it got down to. She rolled a 1 on initiative, and 3 PCs rolled a 1 on initiative. If one less PC had rolled a 1 on initiative, they would have died and she would have lived.
Yep.
So, but yeah, because you mentioned high-level wizards, and high-level wizards can really just swing that around to one segment is life or death. So you have to kind of watch out for that. But again, thank everyone. Thank you so much for all the great questions. Thanks for the discussion. And Alex, it means a lot to have me on here. Thank you again.
Hey, my pleasure, Rick. All right, gentlemen. So that ends our first ever episode of ACKS II Grind. So thank you, everyone, for joining me for my first live stream with a guest. I'm going to be trying to do this every week, probably on Wednesdays and Thursday nights, alternating with my game campaigns, because I run a bi-weekly Wednesday and a bi-weekly Thursday. So figure since I have those evenings downtime, I'll use them for chat. Going to be out looking for some other guests. Rick has volunteered to rejoin at some other points to help me embarrass future guests. So that'll be a good time. And again, appreciate everyone. I hope you guys found it helpful, educational, interesting, all those good things. And we'll see you guys in a week or so.
Thanks again, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye, everybody.